Welcome to the Invest with Clarity podcast, where you will learn how success in investing, as in life, is the result of absolute clarity. Mark Pearson of Nepsis in Minneapolis, Minnesota, shares his passion for portfolio management and commitment to transparency and communication to allow investors to fully understand what they own and why, bringing them to clarity in their investments. And now, here are your co-hosts, Matt Halloran and Mark Pearson.
Hello and welcome to episode number 13 with Mark Pearson from Nepsis. Today's podcast's title is Comparison is the Thief of All Joy. Now, Mark, that's not your quote, right?
I wish I could take credit for that, Uncle Matt, but unfortunately I can't. Theodore Roosevelt, old Teddy Roosevelt, came up with that quote originally, and it is the title of one of our compass pieces that we use for investors, of course, at investwithclarity.com. They can download. But it was old Teddy.
So what was he referring to, and how are you parlaying that into the topic of our conversation today?
I think that Roosevelt's quote, as it pertains to comparing ourselves to someone or something else, is the ultimate killjoy. And I think that he realized that comparing ourselves to others simply removes focus from the true task at hand. And, I think if we're honest about it, there will always be someone who is smarter, stronger, richer, better looking, except in your case, of course, and more successful than each one of us. So I think that probably is the context in which he was using. Of course, in our case, we're using it as the ultimate thought process of how investors love to compare their portfolios to other people's portfolios, compare returns of different investments, different mutual funds, different ETFs, different portfolios, and obviously we'll get into that today. But
and there's always going to be
that doesn't work.
Well, right, and there's always going to be those people who are consistently chasing something that is always just outside of their reach, which is again what I think Roosevelt was talking about there. So how does this apply? How behavioral control, behavioral education, behavioral economics. We've talked about this in the past. You have done a good job of talking about investor behavior. This is like the cornerstone of the problem with investor behavior, isn't it?
Yeah, without question. We've talked about multiple behavioral characteristics on previous podcasts in terms of how investors look at different things as it pertains to the behavioral aspect of investing. And we can talk about the psychology behind it, but at the end of the day, when you are chasing historical returns or when you are trying to compare your performance or your returns to somebody else, the reality is that, and bluntly, Matt, it is impossible to do that because in investment management, there are so many mathematical variables that are involved in the process that it takes computer algorithms and programming to get as close as you can to get an actual comparison on how you're doing versus somebody else. And that's a very detailed statistical mathematical process that most people wouldn't even know how to begin to do. And so therefore, chasing our returns or more importantly, comparing our returns to something else is a fool's game, and it's a no-win game.
But the media screams play by play like it's the NBA Finals at the end of every single solitary day. The S&P is this, Nasdaq's this, Dow's this, and they just keep that programming top of mind inside somebody's brain, even the ticker that goes along the bottom with all the red and the green and what are we supposed to do about all this?
Well, first of all, I think that's a great point and a great question, and it begs I think foundationally, it begs foundationally, what is the purpose? Why does the media do that, right? There is often the flavor of the day, whether it's Apple, Facebook. Lately it's been the FANG stocks, right? At one time it was oil stocks. Another time it was technology stocks. Another time it was biotech stocks. Another time it was dividend-producing stocks. It goes in cycles, right? But understand, what are the two primary reasons the media is there? So if you're an investor and you're looking at media and you're looking at what's happening, you always have to fundamentally understand, Matt, what is the objective of the person you're listening to? What is the purpose of what the media is trying to do by giving you the information they do? Well, first of all, it's to educate and inform, right? I mean, that's why they're there, the educate and inform, right?
Yep.
But secondly, who pays for the media to be there?
Advertisers. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who are the primary advertisers of financial media companies?
Big firms.
Mutual
People
fund
who can
companies,
afford it, yeah.
ETFs, financial services firms.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, now call me a conspiracy theorist guy, call me nuts, do whatever you want, but I believe this is the case, that the media's job is to stir the emotion of the investor. That's what news does.
Mm-hmm.
Stirs the emotion of the investors, continually gets the investors to second guess their decisions, continually get them to question their decisions, get them to think myopically about things, instead of fundamentally sticking to the knitting, fundamentally sticking to, as an investor, what is your investment philosophy? What is your investment strategy? And the ability then to take the emotions out of the process and stick to what your goals and objectives are. Stick to what your investment philosophy and strategy are. This is the behavioral aspect of investing. So if you hear all this news all the time, if you hear all these talks about XYZ stock up 30% or this fund up 14% versus the market or this or that, it instinctively it's going to develop a compare. It's going to force you in a position where you're comparing yourself all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the media is not dumb. Psychologists aren't dumb. We spend our entire lives comparing ourselves to other people. Is that person better looking than me? Does that person have more money than me? That person has a nicer car, has a nicer house. This person has this or that, and I don't. How does this person get this or that? We live in a world of keeping up with the Joneses. We live in a world of continually wanting to do the best. And the reality and the secret sauce that no one talks about in investing is there's no way to gauge how you're ever going to get the best rate of returns. This is why the first and foremost thing that an investor needs to think about is, what are my investment planning, my investment goals and objectives? What are my investment needs? One of my earlier podcasts, I said to you, we try to answer two questions for investors. One, are your investments doing the best they can?
Mm-hmm.
Which instinctively, by the way, most people say, are they getting the best rate of return they can get? Which is not what that means, and I can talk about that if you want in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, am I on track to have the kind of financial future that I want to have? Those are, I mean, at the core of it, those are the two biggest questions that need to be asked, because the investments, are my investments doing the best I can? That's the juice. That's the fuel that helps, is a primary factor in answering that second question of, am I on track to have the kind of financial future I want to have? And that's what the investor should really be focused on.
Well, I have two follow-ups on that. So number one, don't you feel that the financial services companies that are consistently putting all of this money into the media to do this play-by-play are actually shooting themselves in the foot, because they too aren't able to predict, they too aren't able to keep up with the Joneses? Why are they doing that? I mean, Mark, you've been doing this for a long time, and the whole Nepsis idea is this invest with clarity, and you have this very strong foundation, but why do you think that they enjoy shooting themselves in the foot or cutting off their nose to spite their face?
Okay. I personally would think that if I'm running a big company like that and I have the confidence in the ability of what our firm can do, there's no way that they think that. I think what those firms are thinking is, we have a hook. We have a silver bullet. We have a 5-star rated fund. Why do you think we always get stuff? Financial advisors are inundated with, hey, these 10 funds just got 5-star ratings by Morningstar. And of course, I think we've done a piece, if we've not done a podcast on the Morningstar rating system, we need to do that. It's actually, the statistics are unbelievable.
Okay,
so
yeah, just so you know,
remind me of that.
Yeah, I will. I'll write that down, because we have not done a podcast on that yet.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe that's going to be our next one.
Okay.
So I think at the end of the day, the companies really think, they forgive the phrase, sex sells, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I have a super good fund, a 5-star, 4-star rated fund, a top-notch manager, that's a product I can sell to the marketplace. I can focus on that particular thing, and that will drive assets in the door. And it's all about driving assets in the door, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they know that at some level, statistically, if I can drive those assets in the door, there's going to be a stickiness factor to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to stay. A certain percentage of those assets are going to stay. So I'm going to put news out. I'm going to put media out that's going to shake the emotional tree of the investor, get them to look at their stuff and say, hey, is my fund doing as well as that 5-star fund at that company? No, I need to go put my money in that. And there's no better example of this, Matt, than 401k plans where you've got mutual funds in there that people pick, and all people do is look at the historical returns. Because frankly, what else can they look at?
Well, they can't.
They're not going to take the time to do the due diligence.
Right. They can't look at anything else because that's
Correct.
the only thing that we have as measurement. Now, okay, so now I'm going to challenge you on the second layer of these questions, which is you had said, is my money or is my investment management strategy doing the best for me instead of doing what's best for the comparison? Explain, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So the general, and thank you for asking such a logical question. You know, when people hear that, the general rule of thumb is, am I getting the best rate of return? But that's not really what it is. What it is, and my investments doing all the best, they're doing the best they can. Is my asset allocation structured properly? Is the investments I own, are they conducive to my investment objectives and to my goals? I'll give you a great example. I don't know if we've talked about this before or not. We have created a proprietary investment stress test. It's a detailed document that we put together that details very deeply what is exactly owned in portfolios and the allocation. We've been doing them for a year and a half. I would tell you that every single stress test we've done, the portfolios have not been appropriately allocated. The investor did not realize many of the risks that were in their portfolio, and therefore it began the process of them understanding the power behind investing with clarity. Your investments doing the best they can is more of a structural understanding of what the investments, how the investments are structured. Are they conducive to your investment objectives and risk tolerance? And understanding where the potential risks are that could inhibit you from accomplishing your financial goals.
Okay.
That is, are your investments doing the best they can?
Now, the stress test thing, we haven't covered that either. So I'm going to make a note of that. We need to talk about that too, because that's the first time I've heard you talk specifically about something like that was a deliverable. Now, you also said, I'm using your words against you here, brother. What you also said is, what you need versus what you think you want. Okay, I'm paraphrasing there. So you talk about what people really need, and what the media is screaming at you is what they think you want, not even what you think you want. So help us. Yeah.
Well, structurally, it starts with clarity. This is the whole foundational understanding of knowing what you own and why you own it, right? Because if you know what you own and why you own it, or you at least have the ability to know what you own and why you own it, then you can listen to the TV blap at you all day long and it's not going to alter your process, right? Or you're going to listen to be educated more, but you're not going to listen to the sexy stuff. You're going to listen to the stuff that applies directly to the process in which you're engaging in to help you accomplish your goals in the first place. So the best analogy I can give you is think about an election. And think about like the last election, the presidential election we had with Clinton and Trump, right? I would say that most people watched the news programs that were biased towards their presidential candidate.
Oh, of course.
If you were, right, exactly. So if you were a Clinton fan, you were going to go to CNN, you were going to go to MSNBC. If you were a Trump person, you would go to Fox, right? So you're going to where you can get your itch scratched. Frankly, the best thing to do if you're a Trump guy is to go listen to MSNBC and CNN and educate yourself on the differences between the two, because you're not going to hear it from here in your own backyard, right? So wisdom comes, in my belief, from listening to the other side of the story, getting a greater understanding of that, so that it can either A, enhance your case or show you the weaknesses of your case. So how does that correlate to investing? Well, in the investing world, when you turn on the investing news, if you believe the premise that most investors want to get the best rate of return they can, I think that's a fairly legitimate, right, assumption, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to listen to the things that do what? Help you get the best rate of return you can. What are the things that do that? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the hot stock of the day. Let's talk about the hot sector of the day. Let's talk about the things that get you off your strategy thinking scientifically, and let's get you thinking emotionally. That's why we believe, Matt, that the 4 keys to successful investing, your investment philosophy, strategy, flexibility, and transparency, are the cornerstones to successful investing. And you have to have both. You have to have the empirical component, and you have to have the behavioral component. This is why I believe indexing this is why I believe passive investing is not appropriate to the extent of just doing indexing, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, this is why I believe that robo-investing longer term can't work. I mean, it'll work for a short period of time, but at some point your investors are going to move their money because they're not getting the itch on the behavioral side, because the process is not enabling them to answer the 2 questions I said earlier. Are your investments doing the best they can, and are you on track to have your financial future doing that?
Now, the title of the podcast, again, is Comparison is the Thief of All Joy. I wanted to come back to that because when somebody does Monte Carlo simulations, when you hear about those, the 5-star, when you hear about, our fund has beaten blankety blank over blankety blank, which you can put any blanks in there because that's what pretty much every commercial is. In financial services, you have to say, from a compliance standpoint, that past performance is not indicative of future returns. But that's all everybody ever talks about, man. So what the heck do we do about that?
That's easy. If we have to say past performance is not indicative of future performance, but the way we get them in the door has been on what? Past performance.
That's right.
Doesn't it seem to me that there's a bit of a dichotomy there?
It's something that's baffled me, Mark, for many years.
So this is why there's Nepsis. Ultimately, at the end of the day, can we agree that the more clarity you have about something, the better educated you are to make a decision? Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment.
Okay. So if I have the ability to have a greater understanding of really what I own and why I own it, shouldn't that be more important than historical performance?
Absolutely.
Especially since there's no guarantees of future performance.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is why financial advisors and investors come to Nepsis. They understand that in a world of thousands of mutual funds, thousands of ETFs, fund of funds, not to mention the countless indexes out there, it's no wonder investors go away confused. It's no wonder investors think emotionally. It's no wonder investors fall in the trap of doing the comparisons.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, what investors, whether they realize it now or not, is that ultimately at the end of the day, clarity is the foundational component that enables investors to be more educated about the decisions they make about where they put their money, period.
I want to thank you. This is going to come across as being very corny, so be prepared. By listening to this podcast and doing this podcast with you, you have made me look very, very smart in the eyes of my friends, and I'll tell you why. Because I was just hanging out with some other friends of mine, and they know what I do for a living, and so they were saying, Matt, what do you hear from all of these advisors? And I said, well, I hear a lot from a lot of advisors, but there's one advisor who keeps saying the same thing to me, and I hear it's like a constant theme, a constant mantra within the podcasts, and it's that idea is having that clarity of knowing what you own and why you own it. And so I said to them, Mark, I said, tell me what you own.
Yes.
Total just silence, man. I mean, and the look on their face was of sheer terror. And then I said, now tell me why you own it. And I love when you say that, because, and for those of you who are listening to this, now I'm hoping that the podcast is starting to gain greater and greater legs so that more and more people are hearing this message, because that foundation, especially with what we're talking about on this episode number 13, comparison is the thief of all joy, you have to know those things. And if you know those, then the comparison, this joy thief doesn't affect you as much, because you have a greater understanding. So, Mark, I just wanted to thank you. You make me look great, dude. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate my pleasure. Let me give you one little extra piece on that to tie that up in a nicer bow. Not only that, but then you also don't become another dull bar statistic.
Nice.
Because then you're not trying to guess what's going to happen. You stick to a process, and this is what we constantly tell investors: investing is a process.
Mm-hmm. And
the statistics unequivocally bear it out that investors buy at market highs, sell at market lows, and continually have used a strategy that has not worked. The statistics bear it out, as we've discussed.
Yep.
Right? So what you're saying, first of all, I love making you look smart. You're smart on your own. You don't need me to be smart. I've often said that really the process in which how we manage money really is more of a function of common sense.
Mm-hmm.
But some people still scratch their head over that and become a little bit, puzzled as to why I'd say such a thing. But that is the reality.
Yeah. All right. Any other closing thoughts before we wrap up episode 13?
No, I appreciate, as usual, I appreciate the conversation.
Wonderful. Well, so if you have not subscribed to this yet, you know what? I'm sure you've subscribed to this because you're listening to it right now. But if you have not shared this yet, it's incredibly easy to do. All you have to do, no matter on what media player you're listening to this podcast, you can click the share button, and you need to share this with other people, especially this podcast, because this is the podcast that will hopefully get other people to listen to the previous podcast. We're 13 in. And if you go to the Nepsis website, there's all sorts of other amazing pieces of information that will help you really, truly understand the Nepsis idea, being able to invest with clarity. So for Mark Pearson, this is Matt Halloran. We'll see you on the other side of the mic very soon.
The content discussed is for informational purposes only. It is not a solicitation or recommendation for any securities that may be mentioned herein. Advisory services offered through Nepsis Inc., an SEC-registered investment advisor.